If your song has little volume spikes hiding between the samples, a normal meter never sees them. When Spotify compresses the file, these spikes poke through, they distort. My tool is going to catch them before it happens.
That's mastering engineer Jeff Graves, and he's the founder of LuvLang Studio. Jeff built a versatile 24-stage AI mastering platform by measuring 214 audio fingerprints using 15 samples per genre. He explains how hot mixes and overcompression can result in streaming platforms chopping off your transients. That happens before a song ever reaches a listener.
So if I'm giving you something that is minus 14 LUFS and I've mastered it and you're throwing it through your machine, let's call it, and it's going, wow, okay, wow. Let's say I'm a little off even. That's going to be a lot better than giving somebody something that's minus 11 LUFS or minus 12, and they're having to chop it. They're having to cut it down.
In this episode, you'll learn why uploading mixes that are too loud causes platforms to chop your transients and damage your sound, why dynamic range is so important when it comes to streaming audio quality, how the loudness wars actually began, how different music genres have different natural loudness levels, and more. Stick around. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and this is my Inner Circle podcast. What was the impetus for you doing all the measurements that you did, and you did quite a number of them across lots of different music and genres and everything. I'm really impressed how thorough everything is, but what made you decide you wanted to do this?
The biggest reason, I'd say, since I've been a local musician, the big thing with me was once I created a song and, obviously there's a lot of time that goes into that and, and money too, you're in the studio, a lot of time. So you get, your product, it's mixed, everything sounds great. But then when you play it on different stuff, it just doesn't sound the way you want it, right? And growing up where money was kind of tight, we always looked at mastering like, it's fine. That's fine the way it is, right? Until we started playing it on different devices, et cetera, et cetera. So this was the beginning of me going, wow, this little thing that I thought really didn't matter is probably the most important. Right? Because when my song comes out, I want that depth. I want that clarity. I want that glueness, right? I want my song to be glued. And people are like, wow, that is really good. You did that? Now, again, let's be honest, Bobby, a lot of people don't know what mastering is, right? So you can kind of steal a little bit of that thunder. Wow, you sound, yeah, thanks, man. Thanks, But again, going into the mastering platforms of where I had a product, I was always disappointed. I felt like everybody kind of had this black box and it was just like, throw it in here. We're going to spit something out. We're really not going to tell you what we've done to your track, but it's going to sound better, right?
These are the online platforms you're talking about.
I am. I'm talking about, Landr, eMaster, things, the platforms of that nature. And what I really tried to do was be state of the art. What were all these companies doing wrong in a sense? And that's my opinion. I don't really want to put any company down. But I think we can all agree, in a technical aspect, they're only running through about 7 or 8 processes through their song. I'm giving you 24 processes that are going to really enhance your audio. And I'm going to tell you what I'm doing to your audio. And I think that's what's really nice too, is when you upload your song on LuvLang Studio, it will actually tell you and measure your song. This is kind of what you're looking at. This is what you're it's going to put you in the ballpark, right? It's going to talk about hertz. You might want to turn down 250 hertz, correct?
Have you ever noticed that mixing vocals is often the hardest part of getting a track to sound right? You boost, you compress, you add effects, and it still doesn't feel professional. So, to make it easier, I put together a simple mini course on vocal mixing that walks you through the exact steps to get the vocals sounding clear and upfront. If you're interested, scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the show notes. Now, back to today's conversation. We'll get into this, but let's talk about the motivation for actually doing all these measurements, because again, you've done extensive work here and much more than most people would do.
2.5 years.
Okay, there you go.
Yes. I did go to audio school, audio production school. So I'm very familiar with signal flow, peaks, all the audio jargon that I really won't, that I won't bore your audience with.
Speaking of peaks, true peak, which is really important, and it's something that's overlooked everywhere because most people don't measure it, and yet it's really important, and it's something that you take great care with.
I really do. I think, if your song has little volume spikes hiding between the samples, a normal meter never sees them, right? When Spotify compresses the file, these spikes poke through, they distort. My tool is going to catch them before it happens. And this was, all the things I was looking at. What sort of look aheads can I have? What can I do to measure the track and all the data that's coming in? But at the same time, giving that user freedom to tweak it. These other platforms, that the things they let you, give you to tweak, it's like, low, mid, or high, right? Well, what if I want to get in between that?
But is that good to give the user too many variables to play with, especially if they don't really know what they're doing?
I think that's a great question, Bobby, because that's something I really did focus on when I was building the platform. And I think to make it really simple is what I tried to do was take the basic foundation and do as much as I possibly can with all the measurements, but then really try to nail it the first take. I mean, that was my goal from the get-go, is like, I hope it's perfect, but let's be honest, your ear is going to be totally different than mine, right? So having that 7-band EQ and having all these other different features and options that you can turn on and off to go, you know what, my song doesn't need a soft clipper. My song doesn't need this. I feel like I need a little bit more, right in the 2K, just bump that up a little bit. I feel like everybody has that. And that was the biggest thing that I wanted to give my user, was that flexibility to bump it up a little bit. Now, granted, you got to be careful, and, you're going to download your song. And, once you kind of get used to the platform, you go, wow, I turned my whole EQ all the way up, and I really didn't know what I was doing. I think you're going to find that out. And I think what's really great about my product is you're learning. You're going to learn what I'm doing to your song. You're going to learn more the vocabulary, more the measurements. Okay, this is how I measure this. This is, and again, I'm not trying to give them too many options, but I think having a few different options in the bag can definitely get you from great to excellence, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Your post, your measurement post was very informative. I'm looking at number one here. More than 6 in 10 commercial masters are already clipping before they hit streaming. And I'm not surprised. And the reason why is I can walk to 2 major mastering studios from where I live. And these guys are my friends. I go up and I hang out sometimes. And invariably, I go up and one is working on something, and this is what they get in from the mixer. There's clipping all over the place. They always go, well, I can't do anything with this. I said, well, why do they send this to you? And I said, well, that's what they want. So this is a decision that's made by the producer, by the label. I'm kind of thinking it's more label than anything else. But it's something that's sort of built in to at least some genres, which you found here. You found in what you're measuring.
Just to kind of touch on that a little bit, I have over 214 fingerprints. So that's basically clips of audio, and I'm doing probably 15 samples of every genre. So again, that was really important. For me, again, it's all about getting those measurements correct when that person drops their mixed track and they're uploading it. My process it's got to be spot on. And I think that's what took me the longest, was really, 2.5 years of just, there were times where I was really going crazy, but this was really, again, having those 24 named stages in order. and really be able to tell people this is what we're doing. And then, for you to even have that option to take that step out, it's just, again, it's not sterling mastering because, you got a brilliant ear in front of you, right? I'm never gonna compete against that. But my whole goal was to get as close to that as possible. And then somebody with the means of that audio background, like myself, would be able to tweak and go, you know what? This is a really good master, and I'm not able to really achieve this sort of quality on any other platform. This is the best platform, and I know why. And every time I use it, it's educating me. It's telling me, so I just think, that was the big thing too, is I want to educate my users of what you're actually doing to your song and why it's sounding worse or why it's sounding even better. That's a big thing.
Now, one of the things that mastering engineers do, and it's sorely overlooked, is they take a group of songs and they make them sound like they're in the same universe. And it's not so much, let's make each one sound as best as could. It's like, let's make them sound like they all work together. And also, let's add the spreads in as we need it. And this is overlooked, and it's also something that I don't know of an online platform that's able to do something like this, able to do a full album. Do you? Does your platform do that?
It does. It does. So actually, you can upload your 10, 12 tracks. There's a single mode, and then there's an album mode. So it's right there. It's right below where where you hit the little box to upload your track, to where your computer box, will pop up, your downloads. So, but yeah, it's, and I did it for that purpose exactly. So when people listen to your 10 tracks or 12 tracks or whatever you're doing for your album, it's all cohesive, right? It's not you mastering each one individually. Because that would be different, just to be honest with you. To eliminate that, that's what that album mode is actually for.
Do you have the ability to upload a reference track?
You do. That's a great question. And that's going to be at the very bottom of the left panel. Right at the bottom, you'll see a reference track. And what's really cool with that reference track, Bobby, is what I did was I put a little lever on there to where you could do 50%, 60%, 70%, and again, I'm trying to give that listener just a tweak, right? A tweak to where they go, you know what? That's a little too much. I wish I had the option to just back that off. These are all the little things that I want to give the user. So again, we're getting to their focus, right? As a musician, you have your own focus. You're very dialed into what everything should sound like. So, trapping somebody and not giving them these certain little tweaks and options, I think is a killer. And I think that's where I found myself personally, just frustrated. Was like, why can't I get into this and do that? Come on, just give me a little room here, and there just isn't, it's either black or it's white.
I don't believe you should, and I know that most major mastering engineers don't care about Spotify's level or YouTube's level or Apple Music's level. They make it sound as good as possible at basically CD level. And if it works there, it works everywhere else, because when you supply it to the distributor, usually they'll turn it down to whatever they need, or for sure, the platform is going to do that. The platform, will normalize to their level. But you don't recommend that. You recommend mixing to the target level.
Absolutely not. And this is really, this is why. So if I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give somebody something that is going to be a lot louder, right, than what they're going to play it on, whatever that LUFS is, right? It would obviously be -14. So if I'm getting them something, let's say -11 or -12, they're basically going to go ahead and have to cut that, right? So they're going to cut down my transients. You're getting into my my food group. You're getting into my nest, right? I don't want you to get that. I don't want you to mess with that, right? What I want you to do is enhance it, right? So if I'm giving you something that is minus 14 LUFS and I've mastered it and you're throwing it through your machine, let's call it, and it's going, wow, okay, wow, let's say I'm a little off even. That's going to be a lot better than giving somebody something that's minus 11 LUFS or minus 12. And they're having to chop it. They're having to cut it down. And I would think anybody that's mastering would see those, those peaks, right? Those transients and those subtle parts. Wouldn't those get kind of messy?
Well, I agree with that, but we're talking about loudness here, which is really it's dynamic range. If you have lots of dynamic range, it's going to work anywhere, and that's something you talk about, loudness unit. But I don't know of a mastering engineer, at least a major one, that cares about LUFS levels. They just don't. Not only that, you hear plenty of major label releases on all the streaming services, and they sound pretty good. This is coming from mastering engineers that just don't care about that.
That is really interesting. Because I would think, from a mastering standpoint, you would want to get as close to that as possible, for compression reasons, for anything, just to really kind of harvest the quality of those transients, right? And you're not just,
True peak level is important, and it's overlooked all the time. There's that. And with dynamic range, I think it's well known that the more dynamic range a song has, the better it's going to translate on any platform. And if something gets squashed to hell, then usually that means it's not going to sound better. And then you'll notice it as well. If it's really squashed, you'll notice it if something is normalized down or up for that matter. So, I agree with you on that point anyway, yes.
And maybe I'm kind of speaking more on, your home studio guy. Because let's be honest, that's my main market, if somebody that, obviously is with a label and stuff like that, they might use my platform for demos and great things like that, right? To pass along to their people and their members. And, hey, I got this idea and just so it really resonates, right? So I definitely want to add that. I would say having a mastering engineer, in the products and the tools and such that they're using, it's a totally different game. And I think what I'm trying to do is give somebody that in between type avenue, and it's an avenue that I never had growing up. It was like we didn't have an extra, I think they wanted like an extra $1,500 to master our album. And it was just like, when it comes down to the end of it, you spent money on your artwork and, that the whole thing. And again, this is the last step that I'm sure many, many artists did the same thing. And they probably still do today, Bobby. They're just like, nah, it sounds fine. We'll just, and there's all these, we'll purchase a plug-in, right? We'll do this. Those are all Band-Aids. And I guess I was so tired of the Band-Aids and I really wanted to give somebody something that's like, wow, this is quality. And it's all web-based.
I certainly agree with you. The plugins are dangerous. I think you can do more harm than good, and that's what normally happens. One of the things that I see often is Ozone, which is a great platform if you trust it. But most people don't. So it will spit something out, especially if you use a reference track. It'll spit something out that's pretty good, but everybody will go, it needs a little more of this and a little more of that. And next thing you know, they destroyed the whole thing. So what I always tell them is trust it. If you're going to use it, just trust what it's giving back to you.
Yeah, I think when we're recording, though, what we're doing too is, it's your level's got to be set right, and that's something that I did add to my product. That if somebody loads a piece of crap, right, they just didn't know what they were doing. Oh, I want to master it. My system will reject it and basically tell them we're not going to touch this, and we'll give them reasons. We'll give them reasons why. We'll let them know that, the headroom isn't there or whatever the case might be. Right. And again, that might be over their head.
That's exactly what a mastering engineer would do, though. I mean, a mastering engineer will send it back and say, I can do these things, but it's going to sound better if you do it instead. So it's not uncommon. And it's not uncommon for major mixers when they first start a project to do a song or do a rough mix and send it over to their favorite mastering engineer and say, okay, does this sound okay? And the mastering engineer might come back and say, oh, you're off a little here and you need a little 3K. And so they'll compensate for the rest of the album. That's not uncommon at all. But I think most people think that the mastering engineer is going to sprinkle the magic dust on, which sometimes they do. But a lot of times the magic dust is, wait a second, here's the problem and you should fix it. So if you're doing that's great. That's exactly what should happen.
And again, it's, a lot of people will, what's wrong with what do you mean? Yeah, let me tell you what's wrong with it. This is, it just wasn't recorded right. And for us to give you that quality, I'm going to stop them there. I don't want your money, but I'm going to educate you and tell you why. We've touched base a lot, Bobby, on, the dynamics, and I can go through like my dynamics and LRA. I did write some notes here because I knew that was going to be one of your questions about the LRA, preservation. What we do is we measure it pre and post chain. Any changes that compress the LRA by more than 1.5 LU, it triggers a warning in the scoring system. And the section gain ride exists specifically to protect those dynamics on a dynamic source. The attenuation is minus 0.4 dB max. It never boosts. But the LRA, I think, is 95th percentile, minus 10th percentile, or of gated short-term loudness. I know that's kind of weird, but that's how they measure it, right? The fact the LRA equals 95th percentile minus the 10th percentile of the gated short-term loudness. The high equals the dynamic classical LRA, usually 10 minus 20. The low is compressed. The LRA is usually 3 to 7. So all these are all calculated, right? When they're uploading their track. And if these don't measure within certain guidelines, we're just going to spit it right back out to them and basically tell them why.
Okay, Jeff, the cool thing here is you're making a lot of those measurements. I don't know for sure, but I don't think other platforms are doing. I think most of them work on a machine learning basis. They're learning, well, this sounds good in this particular genre, and we have all of these tracks that, kind of match that profile. So let's make everything else that's coming in that genre somewhat like these. So they're working like that, and you're not working like that, from what I can tell, from what you're telling me.
I'm going deeper. And I love how you explain that, because that's a real basic way of doing things, right? So what I did was I went into a deeper layer than that, right? And what I'm doing is I have for that one song in that genre, I have a lot of different fingerprints and a lot of different things that my algorithms can go through to pick out that song that I have a fingerprint of that's going to sound very, very close to what this person has recorded. Now, just because you have a genre, man, that doesn't mean anything. So what I did was I have multiple genres of that style. So I can really try to nail down the fingerprint. And I'm going with major artists, major recordings, all mastered professionally.
Well, let's talk about the loudness wars for a second. Most people don't know how this started, but it was actually in country music. And it was something called CDX, which all the labels put their releases onto the CD, and then they went to the program directors at country radio. And the A&R people would get the CD, and they'd listen, and they'd call up their mastering engineer and say, how come my song is quieter than the one before or the one after? And as a result, the mastering engineers were forced to make things louder and louder and louder and louder. And that caught on with the rest of the industry. So it's surprising where that came from, because everybody thinks it's, oh, this must be a rock thing, but no, it was a country thing originally.
I was in audio production school in 2009, and all my instructors were very, very bent on really teaching us that. They spent a lot of time on that, and they just, because you're not going to win, and really your whole they would say, now look at your waveform, looks like a complete box, right? How are you going to have any feeling in that?
Yeah, well, but again, what I've been seeing again, and I'm not a mastering engineer, but I hang with them, and I hang with really great ones, and I see what comes in, and a lot of times, it's a 2x4. So getting in. That hasn't really changed in a long, long time. It's backed off a little bit in some cases, but there's still, like, if it's a pop song aimed at radio, which nobody much cares about, but the labels do, that's what they're getting.
Well, then too, if I want to get technical too, as you're obviously not, my platform will give you a 32-bit, but if you go 24-bit, you can go 44.1, you can go all the way to 96, 48. What do you want to do? And I'm noticing a lot of people are doing 24.96.
That makes sense, because most of the platforms are going to be that sooner or later, I think, so you might as well do it now. Although it doesn't do you much good if you start at 16-bit. You start at 44.116, it doesn't do you much good if you're upsampling like that, not gaining much. But
you want to make sure you're recording at that.
Yeah. I haven't recorded at less than 9624 in 25 years, since 2001. And the reason why was the major labels started to demand that. And now there's actually a delivery spec that you get if you're doing label work. And delivery spec says, we expect to get this back. We want it at this sample rate and bit depth, and these are the tracks we want, and then we also want the session as well. So you're kind of, you want to get paid, that's what you do. So a lot of it had to do with mastering for iTunes, and that happened in 2012. Then it was almost like mandatory. We have to release on that. So yes, we need, this particular sample rate and bit depth. But, even before that, way before that, we were doing it.
I think my platform will definitely produce the best sounding MP3.
Does that matter anymore?
Sometimes people don't need the whole thing, and I get that. And again, my market is a lot of, studio musician people. So if they're in their bedroom, they're, hey, MP3, they might need that, right? Because they, for whatever devices, that's probably good enough. Now, again, if they're doing Spotify and stuff, that's a whole different platform, right? They're going to go 24-bit. But again, I want to give my clients, and, got a little kid that, got a little drum beat and a bass line, put some vocals to it, put some backup harmonies. And he's like, man, this sounds pretty good. And then he uploads it on my platform, and he's like, man, for $14.99, I can get an MP3 that I can play for all my friends. It's perfect. His friends aren't going to really know, oh, that's an MP3. That's not 24-bit. They're not going to say that, right? But they're going to be like, wow, man, that sounds really good. That sounds really polished, right? And it's going to sound good on everything. And I think this is the gift I want to give to musicians, to where, you can leave your room with a smile on your face, and you can show your friends and your family, and not be like, no, it's a rough mix. Remember, we used to always say that. Now it's a rough mix. If you got a good master today, if you got a really good master, I mean, man, that's half your mixing right there almost, That's
what everybody expects. They expect the finished product now. No one expects a demo. That's kind of a dead word.
It is. It is a dead word. But again, just having people, giving them that option. And I think I have a 3-tier. So the one's MP3, the one is a 24-bit, and then the other one is 24-bit with all the bells and whistles, right?
And then the album. So how about an album? Because that's important, or an EP, multiple songs that are going together.
Yeah. So what I'm doing is there's discounts and such. If you purchase more than one song, you can get like a 3-song bundle. You can get a 5-song bundle. These are obviously meant to just kind of help out those guys that are going, hey, man, I just got a 3-song demo. Or, hey, I got a 5-song. Or, hey, I have a 10-song. Whatever. You might have to purchase 2 5-song bundles, right? And then purchase 2 songs separately. That would be your 12 songs, so to speak. So again, just trying to make it a little bit easier, a little bit more, you're saving a little bit more money if you're going to master more tracks. Also, if you need to do all your coding and all that can be done exactly on the website as well. So all your titles and all that can be, all registered.
Meta tags.
You are correct. Yes.
That's important. And that's one thing that everybody always complains about, adding meta tags, or the inability to do it. A mastering engineer can, because of the platform. They're using Wavelab usually, which allows them to do that. But the average person doesn't, the average musician.
My platform has all that in there. It makes it stupid proof. You spell your titles, how you want them to come up, on the radio. There's also a bunch of platforms too. So if you're like CD Baby, there's a couple other ones that if you're wanting to obviously post your music onto a platform, it's just a click away. We'll take you straight to that site with your track, the whole deal. So I try to think of everything, Bobby, A to Z. So when people are actually, hey, okay, this step is complete. Now I'd like to do this step, kind of help them get on their way, so to speak.
Okay, last question then, Jeff. What is the one thing that people don't know about mastering that you wish they did?
That is a great question. The one thing about mastering, I think that everyone should know, and the easiest way that I always try to explain to my girlfriends that are like, what? I don't understand that. When you don't get all technical on me, and it's like, okay. So mastering, I always tell people, when you listen to a song on a little transistor radio, right? And it still sounds pretty good. Then you listen to it in your car. It sounds good. And you listen to it on a home stereo or someone's, PA system. You're like, wow, man, the bass and just, man, even though these are all 3 different systems and they're going to give you 3 completely different listening experiences, you're still getting that high fidelity, right? And that is the best way I can explain, that's what mastering is. Wow, it sounds really good on everything. That's mastering. And then the little light bulb tends to click on, right? Oh, okay. Take all the technical stuff away, Bobby, out of it, and just your ears don't lie, right? And then, if you get a little bit more into mastering, it's the glue, and that's more compression, and that's more, then it all kind of starts to make sense.
And where can people find your platform? How can they find your platform?
LuvLang, that's going to be LUVLANG.studio. No need to put www in front of it. But LuvLang.studio. You don't need a card. Get on the platform. Once you sign up, you can upload a track. You can check your LUFS to see where you're at. See if your stuff is spot on, right? And then if you are trying to go ahead and get your songs on Spotify or any other device, I make it super simple. You have Spotify at -14, you have Apple at -16, you have Deezer, which they do -15, and then all your podcasts and stuff are all -16, and a lot of your other platforms are all -14 as well. And I'm not sure, from what I hear, everybody's going to go -14. I know Apple Music does not. But, again,
yeah, the AES standard is -16. So if they stay with it's in their white paper, this is what we recommend. So I think that has something to do with it. And Apple tends to follow those things a little closer than everybody else.
Well, they're softer. I mean, they're a little softer than Spotify, Tidal. I think Amazon Music. I mean, there's a lot of them that are all -14. But Deezer sticks out at minus 15 because I won't even get into that whole story. But you can look it up. I just really wanted to thank you for bringing me on to obviously let you talk about my platform. You're somebody I definitely respect. I've listened to quite a bit of your podcasts, and it's very interesting to know that somebody cares that much about certain things that I do. So it's very entertaining. And again, just wanted to thank you for your hospitality.
Thank you, Jeff. And thanks for being on.
I appreciate it. LuvLang Studio, and hope to talk to you soon. Have a good one, Bobby.
Thanks for listening and being in my inner circle. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@bobbyowsinski.com. You can also learn all about the latest in music, audio, and production news, and find out about openings for my latest online classes at bobbyowsinski.com. This is Bobby Owsinski. I will see you next time